Okay, so most people don't know this, but in the mid-70s, the Russians orbited and operated an armed battle station. What it really was a manned spy satellite. This is kind of before they had really elaborate electronic technology and electronic cameras. So they put these massive optical cameras on the space station, had the cosmonauts basically photographing sensitive installations. Now at the same time, the Air Force was developing this interceptor, the Dynastar, and the Russians were afraid that we were developing that thing to shoot down their space station. So they actually armed this space station with a 20mm anti-aircraft cannon. It was bore-mounted along the station and designed to point and shoot down American interceptors. Now the cosmonauts were terrified to fire this thing because if you think about it, when they fired this, it actually could deorbit the station. It's equivalent to firing the reaction thruster. So they had to tie the reaction control system into this and to keep it from deorbiting. And they actually successfully destroyed a target something like 3 kilometers away with this gun in tests. But and this was never disclosed until after the Berlin Wall fell, because it was kind of in violation of every space treaty we had at the time.
Пространство красивое. Работа красивая.
So my favorite film of all time is 2001: Space Odyssey, and what's interesting is Kubrick broke almost every rule of filmmaking that there was in making that movie. He was basically trained as a photographer before he came into film, and he would use his 70mm film camera basically like a still camera. And he would set it up on a scene and sit there and film the scene for a minute with nothing happening. The beginning of 2001, if you look at it, he has these scenes of the African savannah where the camera is just kind of sitting there looking at the landscape and nothing's happening. You hear a little bit of sound, maybe the sun's rising very slowly a little bit. And in one of the scenes, you see this dead zebra with these vultures coming down to eat it. Now, when they filmed that scene, they couldn't get permission to kill a zebra, and they couldn't find a dead zebra. So what they had to do is they actually found a dead horse and got these guys to paint it like a zebra. And so the zebra in 2001 is really a horse.
Mi dispiace, Davide, ma Will non mi lascia.
So, in the comic books, the very early Batman, if you look at his costume and everything, he had this black cape, kind of dark, sinister thing. There was only one spot of color on his entire outfit, which is this big yellow symbol on his chest with the bat. It turns out there was a really interesting justification for that. If he was going up against a criminal and the criminal had a gun or a knife, they would instinctively, aim for that because it looked like a target sitting on his chest, and that's where they would shoot or try to stab him. And so in some sense, it was really kind of a red herring to get people to shoot for the spot where the armor was the thickest. This is actually a strategy I employed pretty successfully when building battle bots. I would put something like a doll's head on the certain spot on my robot, and when the other robots attacked it, they would always go for that because they wanted to destroy it. But that was also, coincidentally, where the armor was the thickest. So that's exactly why it was there.
Random
facts that make your knowledge grow. Timeless wisdom he'll bestow on you. It's the Will Wright Minute.
Okay, so in Care Bears mythology, they live in this place called Carolat, which is way up in the heavens, this cloud-like place, and they enslave the stars, actually, up there. Now, below them is a place called the Forest of Feelings, where the Care Bear cousins live, but it turns out the Care Bear cousins are not bears at all. They're like lions and raccoons and things. But they have the same kind of like Care Bear symbol on their stomach. But they don't have the particle beam weapon that the Care Bears have. It's like their most powerful thing. They can actually mesh these power beams together, almost like the Death Star does when it blows up a planet. And below the Forest of Feelings is, of course, Earth. So you have Earth down here, Forest of Feelings, and then Carolat, which kind of implies the Care Bears are closer to heaven and Earth is closer to hell.
Things that you did not know, random facts that make your knowledge grow. Timeless wisdom he'll bestow on you. It's the Will Wright Minute.
So I'm a big fan of breakfast. One of my favorite sayings is that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. I was in Moscow a few years ago, and I don't know how the topic came up with the cab driver, but I mentioned that saying to him, and he explained to me, oh no, here in Russia we have a different saying. And, in Russia, the saying goes like this. It goes, breakfast is for yourself, lunch you share with a friend, and dinner you give to your enemies. I think the kind of rough advice here is that, it's okay to eat a lot in the morning, but not in the evening. But I just kind of love the way that the Russians work enemies into health advice.
Делишь десерт с товарищами.
Crazy things that you did not know, random facts that make your knowledge grow, timeless wisdom he'll bestow on you. It's the Will Wright Minute.
So it turns out the most popular show in the early 60s in America was the Beverly Hillbillies, which actually had a viewership larger than a show like Lost gets today on network television.
Walt! I need to find my boy!
And a lot of people theorize that the Beverly Hillbillies really was kind of a contemporary response to the growing hippie movement. That basically they were counterpointing this kind of back to the earth, kind of backwoods wisdom with how crazy modern society had become. And in some sense, these backward hillbillies were more in tune with their wisdom than the Beverly Hills people that they were kind of put up against. It was very much a fish out of water story. So in some sense, the Beverly Hillbillies were America's way of kind of absorbing the hippie movement.
J'aime bien mon Will Wright pieds nus en cintre et sans dents.
Crazy things that you did not know, random facts that make your knowledge grow, timeless wisdom he'll bestow on you. It's the Will Wright Minute.
So everybody knows about the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, beginning of World War II. What a lot of people don't know about was their other secret attack that never quite happened. And this, right at the very end of World War II, right as they were being atom bombed by the U.S. and signed the peace treaty, they had a fleet of special submarines on the way to the Panama Canal. Now these submarines were actually submarine aircraft carriers. Behind the conning tower, there was this thing that would fold up, revealing a bomber that was catapult launched off the back of the submarine. And their plan was to take these subs under the ocean across the Pacific to the Panama Canal, surface, launch the airplanes, and basically blow up the Panama Canal to stop all the U.S. ships from moving through from the European theater into the Pacific theater. Now, the armistice was signed, basically Japanese surrendered, while these submarines were en route on this mission, and they got the radio transmission to abort the mission, which is why nobody ever heard about it.
ウィル・ライトは誰を以下を怖がらなくて、誰を以下は彼を怖がる。
Crazy things that you did not know, random facts that make your knowledge grow, timeless wisdom he'll bestow on you. It's the Will Wright Minute.
So most people are familiar with the way ants communicate by dropping pheromone trails that other ants can smell and follow.
Come on, Phil.
They actually use their antennae, or actually their noses. That's how they detect chemicals. That's kind of their local storage. That's how they communicate, local things. But they also have a global storage. Ants very frequently share foods in this process called trophallaxis, where one ant will go up to another, actually kind of regurgitate, food, and the other ant will eat that food that came out of the other ant. Now, certain ants can actually inject chemicals into this social stomach that very rapidly spread through the entire colony. The queen, for instance, excretes a very particular chemical, and she engages in trophallaxis with the other ants as well, so that if the queen were to die, within about 48 hours or so, that chemical dries up inside of every ant in the colony, and they radically change their behavior, and they might move the colony or try to promote a new queen. But every ant in the colony knows within, a couple of days that the queen is missing through this global storage mechanism.
Will Wright 可以搬他的体重的100倍。
Crazy things that you did not know, random facts that make your knowledge grow, timeless wisdom he'll bestow on you. It's the Will Wright Minute.
If you look at the rise of the modern advertising industry, billions and billions of dollars go into this. And it's an industry that really took off after World War II. Before World War II, the spending on advertising as a percentage of the GDP was just, trivial, really. During World War II, of course, in America, we started building huge factories for building airplanes and tanks and ships and whatnot. After the war, we didn't have to build those things anymore, but we still had this tremendous amount of industrial production. And so a lot of these factories converted over to making things like washing machines and cars, etc. And really, it was this mismatch between the average consumption of the average American and the production capability that we had, that advertising basically had to convince Americans to start consuming about twice as much stuff as they were used to consuming. And that was the rise of the modern advertising industry.